And this webinar, I'm going to focus on diet, lifestyle, and epigenetics, or how your body rejuvenates, especially how epigenetics work. So there are three main factors that affect your genetic health, DNA, and aging. And they are epigenetics, which we're talking about today, your chromosomal integrity, or if your DNA stays whole and complete, and then cell longevity. As I said, today we're focusing on epigenetics. So epigenetics is the process which determines what type of information that's already coded in your chromosomes is actually going to be used or activated. Every cell in your body is genetically identical. So cell functions are determined by which chromosomes within your genetic material are activated. So two genetically identical people can have totally different physical experiences based on which genes are being activated or not. Epigenetics are actually essential to life, and examples of this are cells, which when you are growing in your mother's body, they're directed to become the heart cell or a liver cell or a brain cell or a muscle cell. Without epigenetics, you couldn't become a whole person with different organ systems. A second example that's a little more interesting is the X chromosome in activation for women. So if your chromosomes were unregulated without epigenetics, females would have double of the concentrations of the gene products found on X chromosomes. And this actually can happen in certain genetic diseases. Epigenetic pathways normally will shut down an entire X chromosome for a woman, and that allows them to have a healthy life. Your genetic expression changes as you age. One of the most dramatic examples of this in the animal world is a caterpillar that turns into a butterfly. The DNA of the caterpillar is absolutely not different than the DNA of the butterfly. What is different are the chromosomes being activated within the DNA. So it's kind of fascinating to realize that that is how effective and how important epigenetics are. This is a very extreme example, but it's also true for humans. So how does it work? In your chromosomes, there are parts of your DNA that are not genes. These non-DNA pieces are either going to promote the expression of a gene or repress or silence the decoding of a nearby gene. How well these non-DNA pieces of your chromosomes work are affected by your age, by your cellular health, pretty dramatically by your diet, by environmental stress, and even more things that scientists are really still trying to figure out. There are two main important epigenetic pathways. The first is called methylation. Genetic coding is silenced by tagging it with a molecule known as a methyl group. This methylation methyl group process is absolutely dependent on B12 and B3 and some minerals and vitamins, but in particular B12 and B3. And so here's your chromosome. And in your chromosome, if you unwind it, eventually you would see your DNA is wrapped around a center, that's called a histone. And then if you unwrap it around the center, then you actually get to your DNA. And then you'll see this look like little, almost like riders on your DNA. These are methyl groups, and they attach to parts of your DNA that your body needs to keep quiet. If you don't have B12, this cannot happen. In an adult, that can lead to some diseases and disorders. In a fetus, it can lead to death. In an infant, it can lead to genetic diseases. And what do you need? As I said, you need B vitamins, betaine, which is a non-essential nutrient, but it's essential in that we need to have it. Folic acid, which creates methionine. It's just a very complex process. But most important are these right here, these nutrients. You don't have them, this doesn't happen. The second epigenetic pathway is called a histone, and that's the spindle around which your DNA is wrapped. So we took a look at this picture before of your chromosome, and then we see it's wrapped around these center things. These are called histones. And inside your histones are these tails. Science actually calls them tails. And on the tails, there are types of proteins called writers, erasers, and readers. And which is fascinating to me. So these tails read the DNA. They interpret your DNA along with your environment to erase DNA that's non-functioning or functioning incorrectly and rewrite DNA that needs to activate. So genes are turned off or on or can be returned to former action with these tails. And these tails, these histone tails, are completely dependent on enzymes that your body creates and amino acids. It's also, there are some minerals that are important and again, more vitamins, but in particular, enzymes. So a lot of genetic diseases occur because your DNA information to create the right enzymes is missing or malfunctioning, which causes your histone tails to malfunction, and that leads to different diseases. However, if you are missing certain key nutrients, you can cause what looks like a genetic disorder, and it's simply a side effect of an incomplete diet. So the power of nutrients in epigenetic expression. I talked a little bit about how important methyl groups are, B12 for methyl groups. So this is your DNA, and this is a mouse that was cloned. These are cloned mice. They're genetically identical. And this mouse was not allowed to have, its mother was not given any B12. So if you look at its DNA, there are no methylation groups. This mouse, its mother was given B12 and could create normal methyl groups. So the difference between this mice is the lack of B12 when they were a fetus. And what does this lead to? It's pretty fascinating. It's a gene called the Agouti gene. Every mammal has this gene. In mice, it's related to dark fur. In humans, it doesn't have the same relationship to the color of your hair, but what it does have is a relationship to the diseases. So when you have a methyl tag, with your DNA is directed to silence the Agouti gene. And it's silenced in very early development as a fetus. And when it's silenced, you have a healthy brown mouse. If you don't have B12, the Agouti gene is unmethylated, which means it's now active. And when it's continually active, the result is yellow fur. But more importantly, they become obese and diabetic and die at about, they only live about 60% as long as the healthy mouse with a silenced Agouti gene. Similar things happen to humans if their Agouti gene is not silenced, although the research is still out about exactly what it looks like in humans. But that is the power of silencing, the importance of methyl groups and B12. So epigenetics and aging. Your epigenetic expression does change as you age. The changes appear to signal the beginning of other aging processes. In other words, your epigenetic changes signals your DNA to start the other aging processes that lead to death. And this includes a shorter DNA lifespan, programmed cellular old age, fewer stem cells. So what does this mean for us as humans? What it means is the more your epigenetic the epigenetic is supported to slow down the beginning of the aging process, the longer you have a healthy life. And that's where diet and lifestyle hacks come in to make a difference. You can slow down the aging process and the beginning of the epigenetic expression that leads to the aging process. And in fact, this is called Nutrigenomics. It's a relatively new field that looks specifically at the way nutrients and diets can change the expression of our DNA and ultimately affect our health and well-being. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the type of foods that affect our DNA to promote better health are whole or unprocessed foods that are rich in micronutrients. So it's actually now a field of study. This is something I've been talking about for some years now, and I was really excited to see this article on Nutrigenomics that they actually have a name for it, and they're really researching into what does this mean for us as humans to eat a diet that basically keeps our DNA as healthy as long as possible. So regardless of your genetics, the right nutrients make a beneficial difference. They have learned that what you eat today, and especially when you were younger, it will harm or affect the health of your children and even your grandchildren. They have discovered that grandparents who suffered from micronutrient deficiencies, such as from starvation, for example, their grandchildren had genetic weaknesses that were related to that starvation process and the effects it had on their DNA. So even though we may not be of childbearing age on this call, we want to educate our children and our grandchildren that what they eat can have a dramatic effect for generations ahead. And that's it for today's webinar. I'm keeping these short and sweet because there are three and there's a lot of information to go through. Our next webinar is when you are going to learn how your DNA longevity and integrity is achieved and maintained.